I've been working on a project for the last 6 months, an off-grid project, and one of the things I did was install a hand pump so I could have a source of water for the trailer. There is sediment in the water and it gets worse different times of year. Uh, right now it's running pretty clean, but earlier I had a lot of problem with the sediment plugging up the filters, and those filters are only good for about 2 months, and I want something that's a better system and lasts longer and isn't going to get plugged up all the time. I took some of the water and put it into this little canister. It has a two-stage filter, a carbon filter, and a ceramic in it, and it plugged up after about a gallon and a half of water went through it. So this wasn't as effective, and I have to develop a new filter, and that's why I decided on the biosand filter. Now, most of your filters, your cartridge type, are going to plug up with sediment in the water, and most people are using some kind of a cartridge filter for an emergency filtering system for water in case of a flood or earthquake or Katrina or Haiti situation. But I strongly suspect most of those cartridge filters are going to plug up with any amount of sediment in them. So I'm building a biosand filter. They've been used in the third world countries for quite a few years now to filter water. Fairly simple and cheap to make. A lot cheaper than things like the Berkeley filter, which don't really do that much. This is a diagram of a biosand filter, a single stage filter. There's two 5-gallon buckets, one stacked on top of the other. These are black food storage buckets. I'm using black buckets because they don't tend to promote the growth of algae as much as the opaque buckets do, such as white colored buckets. Now the top bucket here is just a water storage bucket. The bottom is the actual filter. There's an 1/8 inch hole on the lid of the top bucket, and that's to allow water to flow freely without creating a vacuum. There's a 1/16 of an inch hole at the bottom of the bucket, and that's to slowly let the water drip out onto the top of the next bucket. Now the lid to the next bucket has 8 1/4 inch holes in it along the sides. Now this is going to allow the water to disperse over the top. This is a dispersion plate, and it'll drip down out of these holes along the side of the bucket, and that's so you don't disturb the biozone underneath. If the water came through very fast, it would put a large circular ring in the center of your filter and distribute the bacteria off to the side. Now this filter relies upon bacteria that forms on the top of the sand to eat the other bacteria like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, parasites. It will attack those and eat them and purify the water. So this will get rid of Giardia and Cryptosporidium and many other pathogens. Now you're going to have 2 layers of sand. The biozone is going to have a couple inches of fine sand on it to promote the growth of the bacteria. Underneath it is just coarse sand, and that'll be to further filter out sediment and other bacteria. On the bottom, next layer is about 1 inch of fine gravel, and then below that is about 2 inches of pea gravel. Now you can see a pipe coming out of the center going up to just a little above halfway to the top of the bucket where the faucet's going to be. This will prevent sand from coming up into the faucet and getting into your drinking water. It's going to operate very slowly, and it'll take well over 2 hours probably to filter a gallon or 2 water. And if you put it on to make it run too fast, sand will be picked up and come out of your pipe. Now you're not going to want to use this with tap water. Tap water will have chlorine in it, and it will kill the biological zone. Also, activated carbon you don't want to use in this filter because it also will disrupt the biozone up on top of the bucket and the filter. So try to avoid using those. Just use your polluted water from your stream or lake or gutter or wherever you're finding your water in an emergency, and you want to filter it. You're probably going to want to wash your sand and gravel, make sure there's no dust or dirt in it. So if you use tap water to do that, let it dry in the sun for the day, and that'll evaporate all the chlorine out of it. I bought my sand at the hardware store, the coarse sand. The fine sand I got at an aquarium shop, along with the fine gravel I also got at the aquarium shop. The coarse gravel you can buy at P Gravel, just about any hardware store or garden supply. It's used in septic tanks for filtration. I'm going to be building a two-stage filter for mine, because I'm going to be using activated carbon on the second stage. These are the food grade. Those are the special buckets that don't have the chemical contaminants that get into the water. They're black to prevent algae growth. This is the hardware you're going to need. Some washers, some elbows, a valve, and a couple fittings, another elbow, and this is all 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to be using activated carbon on mine two-stage filter, so you don't want to use that in your one stage. And this is the P Gravel. It's been washed. Now to the left I got some washers. Those are just regular garden hose washers. An elbow with a regular pipe end and a threaded male end. Threaded female valves, and another valve to another fitting for a male threaded to pipe, and 2 pipe elbows. Now again, all of the fittings and pipe are 1/2 inch. This is a 7/8 inch wood drill I'm using to drill the hole into the bucket. It's just a little above halfway down. And I'm going to install one fitting inside and the valve on the outside. I've got washers on both sides, and that'll prevent leaks. Okay, the one fitting goes inside, and I got to get a gasket over there. These hose gaskets are tight, but that's what I want to do, is have a tight washer on there. Now I'm going to screw the valve on. Now I'm going to put this elbow on. It's threaded on one end to fit into the valve, and the other end is just a regular flat piece of pipe. That gives me a little faucet. Now I'm going to measure the pipe so that it's just about 1/4 to 1/2 inch off the bottom of the bucket, and will still fit into the elbow inside. Next I need another piece that will fit from the valve to the center of the bucket. I'll take a rough measurement there, and that's the fitting. Now again, this is just to prevent sand from coming up from the bottom and getting out. As long as there's not a lot of water flowing through it, the sand will never make it up to the top of this pipe. And you can see the gasket here on the inside, and the gasket on the other side where the valve is. It was a 7/8 inch hole. for the 1/2 inch pipe. And here I'm drilling the 8 1/4 inch holes in the lid with the bottom bucket. I'm putting these holes as close as I can to the edge of the lid. Now I'm drilling a small 1/16 of an inch hole right in the center of the top bucket to allow the water to leak out slowly onto the diffusion plate. Now again, 1/8 inch hole in the top lid, 1/16 hole in the center of the bottom lid, 8 holes, 1/4 inch holes in the top lid of the bottom barrel. And here's the setup inside. This is the pea gravel. I've washed this. I'm going to go ahead and add this because I'm going to use this layer on the 2-stage filter I'm going to build, and then I'm going to go out and water pressure test this whole system after I'm through with this. This is the activated carbon I'm going to be using in my 2-stage filter. Got that at the aquarium shop also. It's granular, you don't want the powder. This is the small gravel I got at the aquarium shop. You'll be using this on top of there. And then some all-purpose sand here for You can get this at the hardware store. I'm using for my two-stage 3 grades of sand, small, medium, and large, and 3 grades of gravel, the pea gravel and small gravel and medium-sized gravel. This is the fine sand that you'll need. I've got this at the aquarium shop. It's fine sand. Make sure it's silica sand. Make sure all of this is silica, not some other substitute. I'm going to go ahead and test out this section so far. I'm not filling it up with sand or anything yet. I want to just do a water pressure test on this. I'm leaving the valve closed. You don't want to do that when you're really using it, but I want to see how watertight everything is here. So I'm going to let this water slowly drip down and check for leaks. I'm not seeing any water leaking out of here. The 16th inch hole isn't allowing it to have enough pressure to seep out through the rim of the bucket, and I don't see any leaks around the faucet, so this looks pretty tight. And I'm going to go ahead and let this bottom bucket fill up, make sure the water comes out of the faucet all right if it's through that high of a grade. You can hear the water maybe dripping down inside there in the bucket, and that's just what I want, a real slow drip. It's been about 45 minutes and it's all dripped down into the bottom bucket. I'm going to go ahead and open up the valve and see if the water comes out. It should drain down to about the faucet level. It can't siphon all water up from the bottom once it's past the valve level. And it looks like it's working fine. Again, you want to keep the valve open while you're purifying the water once you get the sand in there. I'm just opening it fast here because I wanted to check the leakage around the faucet and make sure it would work all right, pulling the water up from the bottom. Well, that should give you an idea of how to make a single stage biosand filter. Part 2, I'm going to go ahead and make this into a 2-stage filter and post that as soon as I get a chance. I still have to wash some gravel and do some things before I can finish the 2-stage. So this will give you an idea how to make the single stage. In part one of this series, I showed you how to make a single stage biosand filter. In this video, I'm going to be converting this into a two-stage biosand filter. Biosand filters are good for filtering parasites, bacteria, protozoa, virus, and sediment. And I'm after something that will filter fine sediment out of the well water I'm getting from the hand pump. It's been a problem in the past plugging up cartridge type filters, so I needed something that's long term, several years lasting, and more effective at sediment filtration. Parts for these single stage filters should be easily available. Somebody in the neighborhood is going to have a couple of 5-gallon buckets. PCV pipe can be taken out of your backyard sprinkling system. Should be sand and gravel available, local parks, schoolyards, playgrounds, neighbors' gardens. So you should be able to fashion a makeshift version of this to use in an emergency. Also, you may want to build one of these just to have it on hand in case there is an emergency. If you live in a flood zone, earthquake zone, tornado, hurricane, you may want to have one of these on hand already made. They're cheap and inexpensive, and the single stage is easy to make. You could also make one out of 50-gallon oil drums and supply water for the whole neighborhood if you chose to do so. These work by doing 4 stages of purification. One is the biological zone, where bacteria eats your parasites and pathogens, viruses. That happens on the surface of the biozone here. Mechanical trapping, sediment can be attracted to porous rock, and it will filter out sediment. Absorption, that's electrostatic charge, which will attract small particles and viruses down to virus level and attract it to the sand that's in the sand stage of this. Also, natural death, that's from nutrient depletion. There won't be anything for bacteria or virus to eat or thrive on when they start to go through the sand area of the filter. This is the material I'm going to use. It's all 1/2-inch PCV pipe. I've got some garden hose washers, a couple elbows. Going to need actually 3 elbows, 2 of them threaded, a couple of plugs for a drain plug. These are 1/4-inch brass plugs. A 4-way coupler, 3 caps, and some PCV pipe and glue. This is my single stage filter here, and I'm going to be modifying this to convert it to the second stage of the dual stage filter system. I'm using a 7/8" drill here. That's the only size drill I had that was close enough to the 1/2-inch pipe thread. I'm putting the gaskets on the threaded pipe fittings here for this connector. I put a gasket on each side. These are just standard hose gaskets for garden hoses. You have to make sure these are put on very tightly. These gaskets don't seat well against a curved surface, and you don't want any leaks at this point. I'm going to put the 4-way coupler on a piece of the pipe here so I can take a measurement. I want that to be in the center of the barrel, and I need to cut it so it's just about exactly in the middle there. Now I'm going to put caps on the end of 3 pieces of pipe, and I'm going to cut them to fit. This is going to be a sort of a diffusion panel. It's not going to support much of a biological zone in this area because of the lack of nutrients after the first stage. These have to be cut so they just about touch the edges. Now we can't use a diffusion plate like we did on the water storage tank because the 16th inch hole at the bottom of the storage tank would plug up with sand from the first stage of the filter. I'm going to drill 2 holes in each pipe here, one out towards the end and one towards the center. This will distribute the water over the top of the bucket, and so that the water isn't just going in one spot and trickling down one side or down the center and not evenly distributing it over the top of the sand. Now you don't want to glue this into the elbow. You want to be able to remove this for maintenance. You're going to have to wash these barrels out when you're through. And I'm using a rag with some water and a little bit of chlorine in the water. Kill any bacteria. I'm going to do this to all 3 buckets is when I'm finished with them. Then again before I put the gravel in. Now I've cleaned and washed this distribution pipe. Putting it in, again, don't glue it in. This has got to come out. You're going to have to scrape off a little bit, maybe an 1/8 inch of dead bacteria that's going to accumulate on the top of your biofilter. This is a new bucket. I'm going to make the first stage of filtering out of this. This is going to be very similar to the way I started the first stage, and it's going to have a elbow on it though instead of a faucet fitting. You have to get sure you get these burrs off of there so that gasket will seat. I'm seeing these holes are way too big for this pipe, and I'm going to have to be extra careful that these don't leak. Just putting a gasket on a threaded pipe fitting here. That drill size 7/8 was a little too big. There's a lot of movement in this. I should have used a size or two smaller drill for this point of the project. Again, put these on as tight as you can. You want those gaskets to seat really tight against the barrel, especially when it's curved. I'm going to measure a piece of pipe here. I want it to be just about from the elbow about a ½ inch to the center of the barrel. I had to go to the hardware store and I forgot to get this elbow. And I'm going to put the pipe in so that it's a ½ inch above the bottom of the barrel. That's so it won't pick up sediment off the bottom. Not much sediment. It's going to rise up into this pipe when it's at a slow rate of flow. Now I'm going to be drilling a hole in here and putting in a 1/4 inch brass plug. It's going to be a drain plug so that I can drain the water out of these barrels if I want to store them or to flush them out. You're not going to be able to pour the water out of these barrels because they're going to be full of sand and gravel and it's going to get all mixed up. So I'm going to have a drain plug to do some maintenance and storage things with it. I'm threading this in here by hand, self-tapping it. These have a hex head on them and you can put a washer underneath them if you do have a leak here. These plugs fit flush to the bottom so the barrel doesn't wobble. Now I've washed and cleaned this with chlorine. Remember not to glue this in. You're going to have to do some maintenance on the top surface of your sand. Scrape some of the dead bacteria off every couple of months. Now this lid here doesn't have a hole in it and it has a gasket seal, so you have to pound this down. It'll make a nice airtight seal here. Putting on the first stage here, I'm going to be connecting them together. This doesn't have a hole in the bottom either. This is the water storage tank, and this lid has the 1/8 inch hole and the bucket has a 1/16 inch hole in the bottom. I'm measuring the pipe to fit in to connect these together. These don't get glued in either. They might need to be taken apart again. Well, that takes care of the mechanical assembly, and I'm going to have to do a water test of the whole system now. Now that I got the filter almost built, my well water's coming out crystal clear here. I even got some of it to run through my carbon filter inside the trailer. I'm going to pour some water in and see if we got any leaks along the system here. I see some water leaks around these fittings, and I have to go find out what's the matter in there. Okay, I cut this pipe too long and it was spreading the two elbows apart, causing them to leak, and I got to cut about a ½ inch off of these. Best to make this pipe as short as possible so this doesn't happen. And I'm also going to tighten up both fittings here using a set of channel locks to hold on to it, and really tightening this down tight, and do that to both of these elbows. I don't see any more leaks. Looks pretty good. Now the water, once the first stage is full, will start leaking out around the diffusion plate. That's normal. Now the rate of flow is a little more than I expected. I'm going to check that, make sure that's a 1/16 of an inch hole. If not, I'll have to do something about it. Probably try a 1/32 hole, try to slow down the flow rate here a little bit. You can actually see the holes in the diffusion plate because that water bucket is tapered down and leaking a lot of water out of the diffusion plate that way too. Well, I'm going to go ahead and fix a few things and then get this working, water tested again, and then in part 3 I'll be putting the gravel in here and showing the various layers of sand and gravel that can be used in the filters. In part 2 of the series, I had a problem with water leaking from the diffusion plate, and that was because these holes were too far to the edge of the lid. And I'm going to do is make up a new lid and put those in about an inch farther so that they're inside the rim of the water storage tank. And here's the new lid, and I've placed them in far enough now where they'll be inside the rim of the water tank. Now when I originally built this, I was going to take these handles off, but I found they're handy for carrying it. These buckets get awful heavy once they're full of sand and water, but they were getting in the way of the faucet and in the back. So I thought what I'd do is make a little modification if I ever built another one, or if you want to build one, you'd be able to leave these handles on here without this interference. So what I would recommend doing is putting it in the front. And that way you can put the the little handles here in the back part of the tanks, and they'll be out of the way. I need to talk a little about the biozone here. This is the single stage filter, and this is what most of you guys probably want to build, something that you can build and test and then put away for an emergency. It'll take about 3 weeks to establish a biozone, and during that 3-week period you're going to have to continually feed some polluted water in there with bacteria in it to feed the biozone to make it develop and grow. So it'll take some time before you'll be able to have an active biozone. The rest of the 3 stages of filtering will do an excellent job, though. It'll filter out most of the bacteria, all the sediment and parasites. So that water could be filtered into your cartridge filters or use chemical filtering. But I'm going to recommend putting a layer of activated carbon, about an inch layer above your fine gravel layer, and that'll help reduce the bacteria in this. The simplest way to purify the water is simply put it in clear plastic bottles and set it out in the sunshine for the afternoon, and that'll kill off most of your extra bacteria. If you just treated the water with chemicals, you'd still have sediment, heavy metals, and dead bacteria in there, and parasites. So it'd be pretty awful stuff to drink and not very healthy. So this will clean it up so that you can use it in your ceramic filters or whatever other things you have. You're not going to want to use chlorinated tap water because that'll also disrupt the biolayer. And I'm going to be using well water, so I'm going to be using active carbon in it because there's not much in the way of bacteria in my well water either. This biozone is primarily for heavily polluted and long-term filtration. This is a diagram of the 3-stage filter that I'm going to be building. I bought some sand at the local hardware store, and I found out it was very difficult to wash and clean it, especially with a hand pump well. So I was going to get some pool filter sand. They sell it at the pool shops. That's the best thing to use. A little more expensive, but both pool shops were out of it. So I wound up going back to the aquarium shop and getting the sand and some of the gravel I needed. You don't want to use the epoxy coated gravel because it will defeat the purpose. This is just the regular gravel. The 1-stage filter, you'll just use a layer of coarse sand and fine sand, and a layer of coarse gravel and fine gravel. I'm using 3 levels of gravel in that. This is the activated carbon that I got at the aquarium shop. So I'm going to go ahead and put the gravel and sand into the filters here and get this thing built. This is my 2nd stage. It's to be similar to your single stage. Process is the same, except I'm going to be using 3 levels of gravel and 3 levels of sand in it. And this gravel's already washed, so I can just put it in there. The gravel you get at the hardware store is just as good. You just have to wash it, and it's a lot easier to wash than the sand. I'm pushed for time here, so I'm going to take the easiest route, although this stuff is very expensive at the aquarium shops. And I'm putting about 2 to 3 inches of each layer of gravel in here. And I'm going to be adding about 1 inch of activated carbon on top of this fine gravel. Now you can produce your own fine sand from your coarse sand just by sifting it out of there. That'll also get the fine sand out of your coarse layer. It's a little time consuming. You can also use this to wash your sand with. I wouldn't recommend washing the fine sand though, it just turns into a muck. Now I'm going to treat this with some chlorinated water to kill any bacteria that's remaining in it. I'm just putting a few drops of chlorine in there, and then I'm going to fill the bucket and let it sit for about 10 minutes. After I'm through, I'm going to flush it out with fresh water and let it sit for a while in the sun, get all the chlorine out. It's gas, so it should dissipate. Then I'm going to put the plug back in it. The plug's in the bottom, that's why I put them there, so you can flush things and work on things, or drain the tanks so that they can be stored. Now this is going to be my first stage, and I'm going to be using fine sand and medium sand, and all three grades of gravel in this. Now be sure the gravel you get at the aquarium shop doesn't have the epoxy coating on it. They do that to make it look pretty, and it defeats the purpose. So I'm doing all three grades of gravel just as I did in the second stage here. This is my medium grade sand that I put down there, and then I'm going to fill up to about 3.5 inches to the top with the fine sand. And I'm putting the fine sand in here. And again, make sure you've got close to 3 inches gap here from the lid. This is to form a small pond for the algae to live in, or the microbes to live in. Okay, I've chlorinated both of these, pulled the plugs out, and I'm flushing them both out now with fresh water. Get any sediment or dust, chlorine that might remain in the system. Now I'm going to put the plugs back in once these have been purged and dried out in the sun, and I'm going to be ready to put this thing together finally. You have to prime these. Each bucket has to be filled with water. That's because there's like a suction that takes place in here when you open the valve, and with the slow rate of flow through this, it won't be able to draw the water up into the first stage piping. Water's got to flow uphill in that stage. So this will create a suction effect and kick start the whole system to go. So all 3 buckets will need to be primed. Okay, I'm adding the first stage here. Make sure that pipe and everything is balanced right so the water flow will go through the system. Priming this one up right to the top. And put these gasket seal lids on tight here. And another thing is, always be sure you're putting the right lid on the right bucket, because sometimes you can make a mistake and that'll really foul things up. This is the lid with the diffusion plate in it here. Make sure that's got a tight seal on it. Now I'm going to let about 20 gallons of water kind of go through here and clean the whole system out. Just let it slowly fill over the next few hours, and then see if I can get any remaining sediment out of the filter system. Now here it's dripping at about the proper rate of flow that I want to see. And this will take about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, to fill 1 gallon. It's all cleaned out and I'm ready to do some water. I put 2 gallons of water in the storage tank on top to produce the 1 gallon down here. And that's because I'm going to need additional water to make sure the biozone gets covered with water and everything gets filled up again properly. And always turn your valve off when the water's flowing. If you let the water stop flowing and drain all your tanks, you'll have to reprime your whole system. Now, since I'm just starting this up, there's no biozone yet. Probably is not going to be much of a biozone with my well water. I'm going to purify mine by just setting them out in the sun here, letting the ultraviolet rays purify the remaining bacteria that might be in there. The water is dripping out of the diffusion plate here, and it's still filling the inside tank. There's a little back pressure there, so that's why I like to run an extra gallon of water even after I'm finished. Once this stops, I'm going to check and see if the biozone is covered with water. And there's about 1.5 inches of water, which is adequate for it. I was hoping to have filled to the top, but there's sufficient back pressure once the valve is closed to prevent that from filling to the top.